The moment I heard her say it, I knew it wasn't a mistake. "She's the nanny, right? The old one who raised Daniel?" My daughter-in-law's cousin didn't even bother to whisper. She said it out loud, right in front of the champagne tower, with that careless kind of smile that cuts deeper than any insult meant to hurt. I sat at the far end of the ballroom, at a small table marked Support Staff and Overflow. They didn't even write my name, just a generic tent card with tiny cursive that said, "Reserved." No one made eye contact. No one asked me to stand beside the cake or walk down the aisle. I wasn't even listed in the program. Daniel never corrected her, not once. He just laughed, and let them believe the woman who spent 32 hours in labor for him was someone we'd paid by the hour. And the truth is, in a way, maybe that's all I've become to him. A background fixture. A warm body who made his meals, folded his shirts, listened to his dreams, then faded away. I wore a dress I hadn't put on in nearly 15 years, the same charcoal blue gown I wore at Richard's funeral. I remember picking it out carefully that day, something elegant, something that said, "I still have dignity," even as I buried the only man who ever saw me. And now, here I was again. Different gathering, same silence. The gown still fit, though the sleeves hung a little looser. My arms had thinned since then. Funny how grief does that. It eats away at you from the inside out. Every time I looked at Daniel, standing beside Ivy, his brand new bride in her $1,000 lace veil, my eyes searched for the little boy I once knew, the one who called me Mama Bear and cried when he scraped his knees. But all I saw was a stranger in a rented tuxedo toasting a room full of people who didn't know who I was and didn't care. I started to rise from my seat, to say something, to speak, but then Daniel raised his glass. "To the people who made me who I am." And he didn't look at me. He looked at Ivy's parents. The applause that followed was deafening, but inside my head, there was only one sound, the slow creak of my chair as I sat back down and swallowed the taste of my own erasure. I should have walked out, but I didn't, because I wanted to see what else they'd take from me before the night was over. I woke up with my back aching and the smell of stale hairspray still clinging to my scalp. The charcoal blue dress was slumped over the chair like a ghost that had already left my body. I didn't even remember taking it off. One heel was in the living room, the other under the fridge. As if the night had unraveled itself while I slept, I boiled water for tea, not out of hunger, just habit. The kettle's whistle was the only sound in the house. I reached for my favorite teacup, the one with the faded violets and the little chip near the rim. Richard gave it to me on our 10th anniversary. I've glued that chip back in place 3 times now. Every time it breaks, I fix it. Because some things are worth saving, even when they're no longer perfect. I held it close, letting the steam fog my glasses. Daniel hadn't called. Not after the wedding, not even a text. Nothing. I told myself maybe he was on a honeymoon. Maybe he'd reach out later. But I didn't believe that. Not really. The distance had started years ago. Slowly, like a leak under the sink that doesn't flood the kitchen all at once. At first it was missed dinners. Then it became, "Sorry, Mom, I'm swamped," and "Let's do next weekend." Eventually, I stopped asking. 3 days before the wedding, I'd gotten a call. Not from Daniel, but from Ivy's mother, Darlene. She had a voice like lemon tea, sweet but acidic. "Hi, Monica. Just a quick thing. For the wedding, we were thinking maybe something neutral for your dress. Nothing too bright. You know, we don't want to clash with the floral palette." Floral palette. I had to Google what that meant. Now that dress, my charcoal blue, safe and silent, is crumpled like tissue paper on a chair that sees more emotion than most people I know. My phone buzzed. Voicemail. Not Daniel. The wedding planner. "Hi, Monica. Just wanted to ask if you still have the veil box. It was accidentally sent to your address. If you could return it to the vendor, that'd be great." I stared at the phone in my hand. Even in their mistakes, I was just the delivery woman. The person who didn't belong, but was still expected to clean up after the party was over. Delilah always had a way of showing up when I least expected her. I hadn't seen her in years. Not since her son Micah moved to Chicago and she stopped coming by for Sunday dinners. But there she was on my porch that morning, wearing a scarf with sunflowers on it and holding a small brown paper bag like she'd never left. "I was in the area," she said. "Thought I'd check on you." I didn't ask how she knew something was wrong. Delilah always knew. We sat at the kitchen table, where the light filtered in soft and golden through the lace curtain. I poured her tea in the chipped violet cup and took the plain one for myself. She noticed, of course. She always noticed. We talked about small things at first. Her son, my garden, how the tomatoes had gone bitter this year, no matter how I tended them. Then, just as I was starting to feel a little warmth crawl back into my chest, she said it. "I saw the wedding photos. Ivy posted them. Gorgeous venue." I nodded, stirring my tea with a spoon I didn't need. "But I didn't see you in any of the pictures," she added softly. "Were you there?" My throat caught. I smiled, tight and practiced. "Oh, you know how it is. Must have slipped out of frame. I was around, just busy helping." Helping. That's what I'd become. Not family, not even guest, just background help. Delilah didn't say anything, just sipped her tea, her eyes gentle but steady. When she left, she handed me the little bag she'd brought. "Something I found when I was cleaning out the hall closet," she said. "Thought you might want it." After she drove off, I opened it. Inside was a small wooden frame, worn around the edges, and inside that, me, younger, brighter, laughing, holding baby Daniel on my hip, his fingers wrapped around my necklace, drool on my collar, both of us beaming like we'd just found the world. I held that photo like it was made of fire, unsure whether to press it to my chest or throw it in the drawer, because once that boy looked at me like I was everything, and now I wasn't even worth a mention in his timeline. There's a silence that doesn't sound like peace. It hums in the walls, settles in the corners of the kitchen, and lingers even when the TV is on. That's the kind of silence that had been living in my house ever since the wedding. Daniel hadn't called. Not once. I tried to fill the space. I swept the porch, even though it was clean. Trimmed the rosemary, even though it was already dying. Took down the guest linens just to fold them again. It felt like pretending mattered. But every time I passed the hallway closet, something inside me stirred. The top shelf held a faded storage box, one of those plastic tubs with a cracked lid and peeling masking tape across the front. "Daniel, keep." I hadn't opened it in years. Inside, it smelled like old paper and something sweeter, maybe the faint memory of his baby lotion or the glue from his school projects. I pulled out a folded piece of construction paper, a Mother's Day card, lopsided hearts, red marker. "To the best mom in the world, you make the best grilled cheese. Love, Daniel." I laughed. Then I cried. Then I laughed again through the crying. There were dozens like it, Father's Day jokes he wrote to cheer me up after Richard passed, a scribbled drawing of our dog Peanut, old birthday photos with frosting smudged on his cheek. I sat cross-legged on the hallway floor, surrounded by memories that felt like they belonged to someone else's life. What happened to that little boy? When did he stop needing me? The shift wasn't sudden. It crept in over time. When he started dating Ivy, our Sunday dinners grew shorter. He started using words like image and optics. Then it became, "Mom, maybe don't comment on my posts, okay? It feels outdated." Outdated. That's what I'd become. I sat on the couch with my phone in my lap, thumb hovering over the screen. I typed, "Do you still think of me as your mother?" Then deleted it. Typed again, "I love you. I just want to talk." Deleted. "Do I embarrass you now?" Backspace. 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 In the end, I didn't send anything, because deep down, I already knew the answer. The text came on a Tuesday afternoon, right as I was clipping coupons I'd probably never use. It wasn't Daniel. Of course it wasn't Daniel. It was Ivy. "Hi, Monica. We're sending out thank you cards. Can you confirm your mailing address?" No warmth, no curiosity, just the stiff politeness of someone ticking off a to-do list. I stared at the message for a long time. My thumb hovered over the reply button, twitching with a dozen different versions of "Are you serious?" But none of them made it past my lips. Instead, I just typed my address. Plain, simple, sterile, and hit send. It took less than a second for the message to disappear, but it left a bruise behind, one of those invisible ones that never quite heals. That's all I was now. A line in their spreadsheet. A recipient of their mass-printed gratitude. I thought back to the first time I met Ivy. Daniel brought her over for dinner on a rainy Thursday. She wore a cream-colored blouse and a necklace shaped like a leaf. Everything about her was tidy, too tidy. Even her smile felt rehearsed. She complimented the lasagna, then picked around it with her fork. "This is lovely, Mrs. Guy Green," she'd said. I smiled. Then halfway through the meal, she slipped. "Monica, could you pass the pepper?" Monica. Daniel didn't even flinch. He just kept talking about some pitch meeting at work, as if I hadn't just been stripped of a title I'd earned with 24-hour fevers, scraped knees, and solo parent-teacher nights. It was small, but I felt it. That's how it starts, isn't it? Not with cruelty, not with shouting, but with omission. With little things, like a name not spoken right, a role not acknowledged, a seat not saved. And before you know it, you're sending your own address to your son's wife because she doesn't even think to ask if you enjoyed the wedding or if you were hurt by what they let happen there. I placed my phone face down and stared out the window. The wind was shaking the last of the leaves from the maple tree in the yard. Even the branches knew when it was time to let go. The box arrived on a Thursday. No return address, just my name, written in tidy cursive that wasn't Daniel's. I knew it was from them. I carried it inside, hands trembling a little. The weight wasn't much, but something about the way it sat in my arms felt heavy. I opened it at the kitchen table, the same one I bought secondhand when Daniel was 6. We built it together. The legs uneven for weeks until Richard sanded them down. Even now it wobbled when you leaned too far left. Inside the box, a thank you card and 2 folded kitchen towels. The card was standard, probably mass-produced. Dear Monica, thank you for celebrating our special day. Your presence meant the world. With love, Daniel and Ivy. My presence. As if I were just another guest who left after cake. Beneath the card were the towels, white, pristine, monogrammed in gray thread, G&D, Green and Daniel. Or maybe Daniel and Green. Either way, not me. I held one of the towels up to the light. The fabric was soft, expensive, the kind you don't actually use. Just hang for decoration. Ivy's taste, no doubt. I stared at them for a long time, then looked around my kitchen. Every inch of this space held memory. Daniel on the counter at age 4, legs swinging, smudged with flour, licking cookie dough from a wooden spoon. The red teapot Richard gave me when we couldn't afford anniversary gifts. The linoleum tiles I laid myself one by one because hiring someone was too expensive back then. This was my domain, my temple. And now they were sending me towels, like I was a guest, like I needed a souvenir. I folded the towels with care. It felt wrong to throw them away. Wrong, but tempting. Instead, I opened the bottom drawer, the one I never use. Inside was Richard's apron, still faintly stained with tomato sauce, the fabric softened by years of Sunday pasta. I placed the towels beside it, shut the drawer, and stood there a moment, one hand resting on the handle, as if holding a memory in place. They can monogram their initials all they want, but my fingerprints were already baked into every surface of this home. The phone rang just after breakfast. I almost didn't answer it, figured it was a telemarketer or the pharmacy calling about a refill I forgot to pick up. But it was Teresa, my cousin, the one who used to live 2 blocks over before her husband retired and whisked her off to Oregon. "Monica," she said, "it's been ages. I saw pictures from Daniel's wedding online. Looked beautiful." I swallowed. "Oh yes," I said, clearing my throat. "It was lovely." "Were you there?" she asked gently. "I didn't see you in any of the photos Ivy posted." I laughed. Too loud, too fake. "Oh, I was there," I lied. just seated way in the back. They had this whole floral arch thing that blocked the photographer. You know how modern weddings are. Teresa paused for a second too long, then let it go. We chatted a little longer about arthritis creams and the rising price of eggs, but the air between us had changed. When we said goodbye, her voice was warm but tinged with something else. Worry, maybe, or quiet knowing. After I hung up, I sat in the living room, the sun catching dust motes in the air like fireflies. Then, almost without thinking, I reached for my phone and opened Facebook. The app was dusty, notifications from a year ago still sitting unread. I typed in Ivy's name and scrolled. There they were, the photos. Dozens of them. Daniel and Ivy cutting the cake, Ivy and her bridesmaids popping champagne, Daniel hugging Ivy's father on the dance floor, each one perfectly lit, posed, filtered. I clicked through them one by one. My name didn't appear once, not in the tags, not in the comments, not even in a blurry corner background. They'd tagged the caterer, the florist, even someone named Lindsay C. from Ivy's book club, but not me. I hovered over a photo of Daniel laughing beneath string lights, Ivy's head thrown back against his shoulder. My finger paused above the comment button, but I didn't write anything. Instead, I closed the app, walked to the fridge, and looked at the one photo still stuck there with a chipped magnet, the one of baby Daniel wearing a colander on his head like a knight's helmet, still smiling at me. Even if the real one wouldn't. I didn't plan to write him a letter. It just sort of happened. I was washing the dishes, quiet, rhythmic, and the words started forming in my head like steam on a mirror. So I dried my hands, sat down at the table, and picked up an old notepad with fading cartoon lemons on the corner. "Dear Daniel," I began. It felt awkward at first, like writing to a stranger, but the more I wrote, the more it poured out. I don't know when I stopped being your mother in your eyes. Maybe when I stopped being useful. Maybe when you met someone who wanted me small, quiet, out of the frame. The pen moved faster than I could think. I used to sit on the floor beside your crib and read Goodnight Moon 3 times in a row because you asked. I worked weekends so you could have piano lessons with Mr. Everett, even when it meant eating oatmeal for dinner. I never forgot your allergy to strawberries. I never left your soccer games early. I never dated again after your father died because I didn't want you to feel second. And still, somehow, I became invisible. The letter filled 2 pages. No grand ending, no demand, just truth. I folded it gently and slipped it between the pages of my old recipe book, the one with the torn spine and flour dust still in the creases. That book held every meal I ever made with love. It felt right for the letter to live there, too. As I tucked it in, something fluttered out. An old grocery list, my handwriting years ago, on the back of a receipt. Just the essentials, milk, eggs, onions, and at the bottom, cake mix, with a star beside it. Daniel used to do that. He'd sneak into my grocery lists when he was little and draw stars beside things he didn't want me to forget. "Don't forget this, Mom," he'd whisper. I had forgotten what the cake mix was for. But holding that list now, I remembered. It was for his 9th birthday, the one where he wanted to bake his own cake, like a grown-up. The one with the lopsided candles and the frosting that kept sliding off. The one where he hugged me and said, "This was the best day ever." And meant it. Before the stars stopped showing up. The walls were starting to close in. So I did something I hadn't done in months. I left the house. No plan. No destination. Just slipped on my shoes, grabbed my coat, and started walking. My legs felt stiff at first, like they weren't sure how to carry me anymore. I ended up at the old thrift store on Bell Street. Daniel used to love that place. We'd come every other Saturday. He'd run straight to the toy bin, looking for forgotten action figures and puzzles with missing pieces. I'd browse the books, the kitchenware, sometimes the old vinyls we never owned a player for. The bell above the door chimed as I stepped inside. Same dusty air, same warped linoleum, same hum of a forgotten radio in the back playing old Motown hits. I drifted from aisle to aisle. A dusty chess set caught my eye, just like the one Daniel and I used to play when he had the flu and couldn't go to school. I always let him win. Always. A cracked snow globe, a faded apron, a pair of baby shoes the size of my palm. Then, near the back shelf, I found it. A wedding dress, simple, ivory, modest train, hanging off a crooked wire hanger like it had been waiting too long for someone to claim it. There was a faint coffee stain near the hem, and one of the sleeves had yellowed just slightly from time. Still, it was beautiful. Not like Ivy's $1,000 designer gown, with its pearl back and couture veil. This dress felt real, loved once, maybe even cherished, now forgotten, like me. I turned away before I could get too lost in it. Near the register, I picked up a used hardcover, To Kill a Mockingbird. I flipped it open. Inside the cover, someone had written in neat cursive, "To Jeremy, on your 13th birthday, you'll always be my little man. Love, Mom." The ink blurred before I realized I was crying. I didn't buy the book. I didn't need to. I already carried enough unsent messages in my heart. As I stepped back outside, the sun caught the sidewalk just right, warm against my face, and for the briefest moment, I thought I heard it. Daniel's laughter, high and bright from when he was 7. Just a memory. But it followed me all the way home. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, and elegant, like the kind that arrives before bad news wearing good perfume. My name was printed in dark serif font, Monica Green. Not Mom, not Mrs., not even handwritten, just Monica Green. Inside was an invitation, printed on glossy cardstock with embossed edges. Ivy and Jeffrey Whitlock request the pleasure of your company for a post-wedding appreciation brunch honoring all who contributed to the success of the event. I read it twice, then a third time, and there it was, my name. Listed under the section Valued Contributors. I set the card down and stared at the kitchen wall. The clock ticked, the kettle hissed. The silence in the room stretched long and thin like a hairline crack waiting to split open. A contributor. That's what I was now. Not the woman who raised Daniel when he cried through the night. Not the one who skipped vacations so he could go on school trips. Not the one who stood alone in auditoriums during parent orientation while couples whispered behind me. I was the woman who had a good eye for detail. Ivy said that to me once. "Would you mind steaming the napkins, Monica? You're just so organized, and we're all so swamped." It had been 3 days before the wedding. I was standing in her living room, surrounded by satin ribbons, glued-on pearls, and personalized mason jars. She said it sweetly, with a smile, and I said yes. Because that's what mothers do. We say yes, even when it doesn't feel right, even when we know, deep down, we're being used. I remember the burn in my hands from the cheap steamer, the way Ivy hovered nearby, correcting which direction the fork should face, the way Daniel walked in, kissed her on the cheek, and didn't even look at me. Now they wanted to feed me eggs and mimosas as a thank you. I stood up, walked to the sink, and lit a match. The invitation caught quickly, edges curling, gold lettering turning black. I watched it burn. No tears, just heat. Let them host their brunch. Let them toast to their curated version of the past. I was done being edited out of my own story. The cemetery hadn't changed. Still the same cracked walking path, the same wind-blown oak leaves caught between headstones. Still the same bench under the rusted angel statue where I used to sit when the world felt too loud. I hadn't been there in almost a year. I brought a single white chrysanthemum. Richard always said they were his favorite, not because they were pretty, but because they lasted longest in water. "Strong flowers," he used to say. "They know how to hold on." I placed it gently at the base of the headstone. Richard Green, beloved husband and father. I sat down in the grass, smoothing my skirt under my knees like I was about to have tea with an old friend. "Hi," I said quietly. Then I just sat, breathing, letting the silence wrap around me. "Daniel got married," I said finally. "You'd hate the way they did it. Or maybe you wouldn't. Maybe I just hate that you weren't there." The wind moved through the branches like soft applause. He didn't say my name once, not even in his toast. They had me sitting next to the caterer. I laughed, bitter and hollow. They think I'm the nanny now. I reached down and touched the stone, cool and smooth under my fingertips. I think I failed. I think I raised a man who doesn't remember where he came from. My voice cracked. I should have done more. Should have made him write thank you cards as a kid. Should have made him visit you every Father's Day. Maybe then he'd remember what loyalty looked like. Across the path, I saw a new grave. Fresh flowers. A ribbon looped through a bouquet read, "Beloved Mother." It hit me in the gut. Someone still remembered her. Someone still said it out loud. I closed my eyes, tried to imagine what you'd say. You'd probably shrug and tell me not to make it about pride. "He'll come around," you'd say. "He's still our boy." But I'm not so sure anymore. I leaned in close, whispering low so only the dead could hear. "I'm not done fighting for him, Richard. Not yet." Then I stood, brushed the dirt from my knees, and walked away before the grief could make me sit there forever. When I got home, the mailbox was ajar. It creaked like it always did, loud, unnecessary, and somehow more dramatic on days when I didn't want anything from it. Inside was another envelope, same size, same return address, Daniel and Ivy, but this one was handwritten. I stood at the mailbox for a moment longer than I needed to, clutching the envelope like it might explode. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like hope flicker in my chest. Maybe he'd written something. Maybe he remembered. I tore it open, fingers trembling. The card was lavender, a soft watercolor flower on the front. Inside, loopy handwriting in black ink. "Dear Monica, thanks again for helping with the wedding details. Everything turned out beautifully. We couldn't have done it without you. Warmly, Ivy and Daniel." I read it twice, 3 times. It wasn't Daniel's handwriting. It was Ivy's, polished, effortful, practiced, like everything about her. The words were warm, polite, padded with just enough kindness to keep it from stinging, unless you knew what love was supposed to sound like. And I did, because I'd heard it before. I walked into the kitchen, cards still in hand, and opened the 3rd drawer from the bottom. Inside were years of old holiday cards, folded construction paper covered in glitter, crayon hearts, Santa with too many buttons, one from when Daniel was 7, addressed to Queen Mommy in crooked block letters. I pulled that one out, held it beside Ivy's card. The difference was daylight and ash. "I love you, Mommy," the old one read, barely legible through smeared gold glitter. "You make the best soup and the best stories." I traced the words with my finger. That was the version I'd remember. The boy who hugged with both arms and asked for bedtime songs twice, not the man who let someone else write his thank you notes. I turned back to the new card, still open on the counter. Then I walked to the trash can, lifted the lid, and dropped it in without reading it again. The phone rang just after I finished folding laundry. I almost didn't answer, didn't recognize the number. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Hi, is this Monica Green?" "Yes." "Oh, wonderful. My name's Clara. I'm a friend of Ivy's. We met at the floral tasting. Anyway, I'm putting together a little surprise project for her birthday. We're asking everyone who helped with the wedding to contribute a short message about Ivy. Maybe something sweet about how organized she was, or how gracefully she handled the big day. Just a few lines." She paused, waiting for my enthusiasm. I sat down. My mouth was dry. She didn't say Daniel's mom. She didn't say mother of the groom. She said, helped with the wedding, just like I was the caterer. Or the valet. Clara kept talking, cheerful and breezy. "I know you're probably super busy, so whenever you get a chance— Oh, and if you have a photo of Ivy from that weekend, we'd love that too." A photo? I didn't have one. I wasn't in any. "I'll think about it," I said. "Perfect. I'll text you the details. Thank you so much." She hung up before I could say anything more. The silence after was heavier than usual, like her voice had left a residue. I walked over to the kitchen drawer, pulled out a blank note card, the kind I used to use for thank you notes back when people still wrote them by hand. I stared at the empty lines. I could have lied, written something hollow and flowery, something they'd want to paste on Ivy's birthday scrapbook between photos of hors d'oeuvres and curated centerpieces. But I didn't. Instead, I wrote, "To the woman who erased me, you'll never know what it cost me to make that wedding feel seamless. You'll never understand how deeply I bled behind the scenes, and you don't have to, because this card isn't for you, it's for me." I folded the note, neatly, precisely, then opened the recipe book again, tucked it beside the letter to Daniel, and closed the cover. Some truths don't belong in memory books. Some truths live where they're safe, inside the heart of the one who carried them. I slipped in just before the first hymn. The sanctuary smelled like old wood and candle wax, like memories that didn't ask too many questions. I hadn't been back in months, maybe longer. I sat in the back pew. No one turned around. That's what I wanted. The choir sounded softer than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just forgotten how stillness feels when it isn't wrapped in loneliness. I didn't stand during the readings, didn't sing. I just sat, let the hush of it all seep into my skin. After the final hymn, most of the congregation filed out to the fellowship hall for coffee and stale cookies. I followed, slowly, clutching my coat like armor. That's when I saw her. Sister Ruth, 92 years old if she was a day. Eyes like polished glass, clear, sharp, patient. She smiled and reached for my hand. "I saw Daniel's wedding photos," she said softly. "Didn't see you in them." I froze. The old me would have lied, would have smiled, said I was just out of frame, that the lighting was bad, that I left early to beat traffic. But today, I didn't have the energy to dress the truth. "I was there," I said. Her eyes didn't blink, didn't flinch. "But they didn't want me in the pictures." She didn't gasp. Didn't say, "Oh no," or "How could they?" She just nodded, then squeezed my hand. "Some people forget the roots that held them up," she said. "Doesn't mean the roots didn't matter. That's all. No sermon, no pity, just truth." After coffee, I walked back into the sanctuary and lit a candle in the prayer alcove. Not for Daniel, not even for Richard. For me. A single flame, not asking to be seen, not needing to be celebrated, just steady, quiet, unshakable. Then I left. The wind outside had picked up. Sharp, but clean. I pulled my coat tighter and walked home slowly, the echo of Sister Ruth's words still ringing louder than any hymn. The knock came just after dusk. Not the hurried kind, not the kind that asks for help. Just 2 short taps. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, there he was. Daniel. Alone. No Ivy. He looked tired. The kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from pretending too long. His shirt was wrinkled, his shoes scuffed, and in his hand, a small brown paper bag. "Hi," he said. I blinked. "Hi. He held up the bag. "I brought you something." I stepped aside, wordlessly. He walked in like he didn't quite remember how the space felt. He handed me the bag. Inside was a slice of wedding cake, wrapped in foil. The frosting had smudged. Almond with raspberry filling. My favorite. "I thought you might want a piece," he said. "I know you like almond." I stared at the bag in my hands. "Thank you." He stood in the middle of the living room, looking at the bookshelf like it was unfamiliar. His eyes flicked to the mantel. The photo of him as a boy, the chipped teacup, the clock that never quite kept time. We sat for a while, awkward, talked about the weather. He said the honeymoon was fine. Lots of walking. I asked if Ivy was well. He nodded. He didn't mention the photos. Or the seating chart. Or the word nanny. He didn't apologize. But he looked around like something was missing, like a piece of him had once lived here and was now gone, and he wasn't sure where it went. When he stood to leave, I followed him to the door. As he stepped out, I asked, "Did you miss me that day?" He paused, his back to me, then turned halfway, a half smile, sad. "I don't know," he said, and walked away. I closed the door, stood in the quiet for a long moment, then walked to the fridge, opened it, and placed the slice of cake on the top shelf beside an old jar of raspberry jam. The label, still intact in my handwriting, Daniel's favorite. Some sweetness doesn't spoil, it just waits. I hadn't meant to go there. But some places pull you in when you're not looking. The old elementary school had been turned into a community center a few years ago. They kept the name, Hawthorne, but the kids were gone, replaced by yoga mats and bulletin boards with bake sale flyers. I parked across the street and sat in the car for 10 minutes before stepping out. The halls smelled the same, floor wax and old paper. My footsteps echoed down corridors that once rang with bell schedules and laughter. I passed the front office, the nurse's room where Daniel got a scraped knee bandaged in 2nd grade, and the cafeteria where he once refused to eat green beans in front of the whole class. Then I found it. The mural. A long stretch of painted wall, faded from years of sunlight and budget cuts. At the far end, near the janitor's closet, I spotted it. Daniel's 5th grade project. His name still visible in block letters, Daniel G. The painting was simple: a house, a son, a stick figure family, 3 people, one labeled me, one labeled Dad, and the last, Mom. She wore a blue dress, not just any blue, that soft charcoal blue I wore to Richard's funeral, the same one I wore to the wedding. My throat caught. The brushstrokes were messy, rushed, a child's version of permanence, but the shape of the figure, the way the arms curved wide to hug the others, felt familiar. He saw me once, back then, saw me not as a background character or event planner or forgotten name, but as someone whose dress he remembered, whose love wrapped around him like arms too big to paint. I reached out and ran my fingers across the flaking paint. It came off like dust, like time. I stood there, alone in a hallway that used to buzz with life, touching the last version of myself he ever honored publicly. "You used to see me," I whispered. No one answered, but the echo in the hall didn't feel quite so hollow. "Maybe one day," I added, "you will again." It started with a simple thought. I wanted to find Daniel's birth bracelet, the one they wrapped around his tiny ankle at the hospital. I hadn't seen it in years, but I knew where it lived. Top shelf of the bedroom closet. The shoebox with the frayed twine and the faded label. Daniel. Important. I brought it down gently, blew off a puff of dust, and set it on the bed. Inside, memories wrapped in silence. The hospital band still looped in a little circle, his first lost tooth in a tiny envelope, a birthday candle shaped like the number 5, a gold star sticker from a spelling bee he almost skipped because he was afraid to lose. I smiled. Then I cried. But at the bottom of the box, tucked between 2 old report cards, I found something I didn't remember keeping. A folded piece of lined paper, crumpled, half-finished, the ink smudged. The heading read, "To someone who's always been there." It was his handwriting. Daniel's. I unfolded it carefully. "Dear Mom," it began. "I know I don't say it enough, but I notice everything. The way you smile even when you're tired, the way you still kiss me goodnight even though I'm too old for that." I read slower now. "You held everything together after Dad. You made our little apartment feel like a castle. You never made me feel poor. You made me feel safe, like magic." The tears came before I could stop them. "I want to be someone who deserves a mom like you. You're not just my mom, you're my world." That's where it stopped. No sign-off, no date. Maybe it was for a school project. Maybe he never meant to give it to me. But he wrote it. He meant it. Once. I pressed the paper to my chest. Closed my eyes, held it there. "Then why," I whispered into the silence, "did you let her erase me?" Not angry, just tired. Just wondering if the boy who wrote those words still lived somewhere inside the man who walked out my door with almond cake and nothing else to say. It came by accident. Forwarded from a woman named Rachel I barely remembered, someone I'd met once at the rehearsal dinner, seated 2 chairs down, who complimented my earrings and then never spoke again. "Thought you might want this," her message read. Attached was a digital invitation, soft pastel colors, gold script. "Join us for a baby shower honoring Ivy Green." No mention of Daniel. No mention of me. No Grandma Monica. Just Ivy. The shower was scheduled for next month. A garden brunch. Theme: Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Custom cookies, signature mocktails, curated gift registry. Everything polished. I read it twice, then a third time. Checked the sender. It wasn't from Daniel. It wasn't even from Ivy. It was from Ivy's sister, Mallory. They hadn't invited me. Not intentionally, at least. I closed my laptop, stared at the kitchen counter. A baby, a grandchild, my grandchild. The ache came fast, deep in the belly, like something had been scooped out of me with a spoon. I wanted to hold them, to be there, to teach lullabies, read bedtime books, tuck tiny socks into drawers with lavender sachets like I once did for Daniel. But how could I show up as someone who hadn't even earned a seat at the wedding? Would I be introduced again as the nanny? Would they smile and say, "We thought you were someone else"? I didn't RSVP, but I wrote something anyway. A letter. "Dear one," it began, "I don't know if I'll get to meet you the way I hope to, but I want you to know from the very beginning that you were born into love, even if some of that love was left outside the room." I wrote about Daniel's laugh as a child, his love of chocolate chip pancakes, how he once cried when a duckling got separated from its mother on TV. I wrote about loyalty and memory and what it means to be someone's beginning. Then I folded the letter, walked to the bookshelf, opened the recipe book, the one with the torn spine, now fat with pages never sent, and tucked the letter inside. Truth doesn't always need postage. Sometimes it just needs a place to live. I started with the dishes, the ones Ivy once said were a little too country chic, her polite way of calling them outdated. I wrapped each plate in newspaper, stacked them into a box, and labeled it for donation. Next came the bookshelf, the one Daniel helped assemble after college, though he mostly held the screws while I did the real work. It creaked when I shifted it, and something fluttered out from underneath, a crumpled drawing of a stick figure in a cape. Daniel's superhero phase. He once told me I had invisible powers, like how I always knew when he was lying about brushing his teeth. I held the drawing for a long moment, then folded it and tucked it into a drawer. Not out of anger, just readiness. I moved room to room, rearranged the armchair so it faced the window instead of the hallway. It caught better light that way. Replaced the wedding favor coasters with old linen ones from a flea market. Threw away the soy candle Ivy once gave me, untouched, still in its box. It wasn't a purge. It was a reclamation, a quiet shift. In the bedroom, I paused in front of the fireplace. Above it hung the only photo I had of Daniel and Richard together. Daniel was 5, his arms around Richard's neck, grinning. Richard's eyes tired, but proud. That photo had lived in that spot for almost 20 years. It was the first thing people saw when they entered my home. But no one came anymore. I lifted it from the hook. The wall looked pale where the frame had shielded it from sun. I placed the photo gently into the bottom drawer of my nightstand. Face down, covered it with a folded cloth napkin. Let it rest. Then I returned to the kitchen, lit a lavender candle, sat in the chair by the window, legs tucked underneath me like I used to do when Daniel was out late, and I was pretending not to worry. But this time, I wasn't waiting. This time, I was simply being, letting the silence speak for me. I'm still here, even if they pretend I'm not. The call came at 9:47 p.m., the kind of hour that makes your heart skip when the phone rings. I was washing a mug when it buzzed, hands wet, pulse loud. Daniel. My first instinct was dread. I wiped my hands on my robe and answered. "Hi, Mom." His voice was smaller than I remembered, worn down, like the soles of a favorite shoe. "Hi," I said, careful not to sound too eager. not to give myself away. There was a pause. Then, "Ivy's pregnant." I sat down. "Oh," I breathed. "Congratulations." He exhaled, long. "It's twins." My eyes closed. For a moment, I let myself imagine tiny feet, matching onesies, story time in pairs, lullabies sung twice over. "I'm happy for you," I said. He didn't respond to that. Just a silence. Not hostile, not warm. Just absent. I waited, unsure if I should ask questions, unsure if I was allowed. Then, just as I thought he might say goodbye, he added, "I saw the mural, at Hawthorne." My breath caught. "It's still there," he said. "The blue dress." That's all. No mention of what it meant, no confession, no apology. But it was enough. A breadcrumb in the dark. He remembered. Maybe not everything, maybe not enough, but something. The call ended 2 minutes later. No promises, no plans. Just silence again, but softer this time. After he hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long while. The lavender candle had burned down low, a little pool of wax glimmering like a forgotten pearl. I thought about the mural, the cartoon sun, the crooked smiles, the stick figure in the blue dress with arms wide open. He saw it. He remembered. "So maybe you do still see me," I whispered to the room, to the ghosts, to myself. Somewhere. And for the first time in a long while, the silence didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a seed. Waiting. I wasn't expecting mail that day. The only things that came lately were coupons and catalogs for clothes I'd never wear. But there it was. A plain envelope with my name on it. No sticker, no gold trim, no embossed monogram. Just Mom. In Daniel's handwriting. I opened it carefully, my hands suddenly uncertain, as if the paper might vanish if I touched it wrong. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, folded twice. I don't know how to say all the things I didn't say. But I'm sorry for letting distance become identity, for forgetting who built the ground I stand on. You didn't deserve that. No, dear Mom. No love, Daniel. Just those words, scrawled in uneven strokes, like he'd written them standing up, or fast, before he could change his mind. I read it again, then a third time, and then I noticed something else in the envelope. A photo, glossy, new. It was the same one Delilah had returned to me, him on my hip, toddler grin, hand tangled in my necklace. But this wasn't the old, faded version from the closet. It was a reprint, color restored, and it came in a frame. Simple wood, nothing fancy, but chosen, intentional, no caption, no note about it, just the photo. I ran my fingers across the glass as if I could touch the past through its surface, and I stood up, walked into the living room, stared at the mantel. The space above it had been bare since I took down the picture of Daniel and Richard. For weeks it sat empty, a ghost of its former warmth. But now, I set the new frame in its place, right in the center. No apology, no explanation, just truth, restored in image. I stepped back. The light from the window hit the glass, catching a small gleam off Daniel's baby tooth. It was only a photo, but it felt like a seed cracking open. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe something close. Maybe something possible. It started with the yarn, soft green, the shade of new leaves and old hope. I found it in a basket tucked behind the pantry, beside a bag of dried lavender and 3 recipe cards I hadn't looked at in years. My fingers hesitated at first. Knitting wasn't something I did anymore, not since the wedding, not since the house got quieter than I knew how to fill. But something about that color. Daniel used to say it reminded him of spring. So I pulled out my old needles, sat at the kitchen table, and began. The rhythm returned slowly. Like muscle memory stitched into bone. Loop, pull, loop, breathe. I wasn't making anything big, just booties. Tiny, soft, for feet that didn't exist in my arms yet, but already tugged at something deep in my chest. I didn't knit for Ivy. I didn't knit for Daniel. I knit because love doesn't always ask permission, because sometimes it just needs somewhere to go. The yarn whispered through my fingers like forgiveness I hadn't fully given but didn't want to withhold. I didn't know if they'd ever see these, didn't know if the booties would be worn or tossed aside or quietly donated with a note that said, "We already had enough." Didn't care, because in every stitch I tucked something they couldn't return. Memory, warmth, the shape of my heart in green wool. When I finished, I held them in my palm, so small, like folded leaves. Then I found a small white box, lined it with tissue, and laid the booties inside. No card, no inscription, just a label I wrote with my favorite pen. For the ones who might remember me. I placed the box on the shelf beside the recipe book, and for the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel quite so hollow. It felt like something had begun again, not loud, not bright, but quietly, threaded, looped, and waiting. The knock was soft, too soft for Daniel, too late in the day for delivery. When I opened the door, I froze. It was Ivy, alone. She stood there in a cream sweater, both hands curved gently around her stomach, her hair pulled back, her expression unreadable. "I was in the neighborhood," she said. We both knew that wasn't true, but I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, eyes scanning the room like she was seeing it for the first time, or remembering it differently. We sat at the kitchen table. I poured her tea without asking. Chamomile. She didn't touch it. There were no pleasantries, no fake smiles, just silence between two women who loved the same man in different lifetimes. Finally, she spoke. "Daniel took me by the old school." "Hawthorne." I nodded, waiting. "He got quiet," she said. "Stood in front of that mural for a long time. Wouldn't say why. Just kept staring." I didn't reply. She looked down at her hands, then back at me. "He's starting to remember things I never knew about," she said softly. "Things you didn't tell him. Things he just felt." Ivy's voice was steady, but not smug. Not today, just unsure. She glanced toward the bookshelf, saw the little white box, didn't ask about it, didn't need to. Instead, she said something I didn't expect. "I thought maybe they should know who you are, not who I was, who I am." Present tense. Not a gift, not an apology, but a door, left ajar. I looked at her then, really looked. She wasn't the villain I'd painted in my darkest hours, but she wasn't a friend either, just a woman about to become a mother. And for the first time, maybe, she understood what that meant. When she stood to leave, she paused by the doorway, didn't hug me, didn't smile, just said, "Thank you for him." Then walked down the driveway, slow and heavy. I watched her until she turned the corner and whispered into the quiet, "Let them come." My voice was steady. "I'll be ready." He showed up just after noon. No call, no text, just Daniel on the porch, holding a box in both arms like it was heavier than it looked. "Thought I'd finally pick these up," he said, nodding toward the cardboard. "Your junk," I said, half smiling. He smirked. "My archives." I stepped aside. We sat on the living room floor, just like we used to when he was a kid, and insisted the couch made his legs too short. He opened the box. Inside, fragments of a boy I hadn't seen in years, a third-grade report on volcanoes, a plastic soccer trophy missing one arm, a copy of Charlotte's Web with his name scribbled in shaky pencil on the inside cover. He picked up an old drawing, a house on a hill, guarded by a T-Rex. "Did I really think dinosaurs lived in the attic?" "You refused to sleep upstairs for a year," I said. He laughed, really laughed, head tilted back, teeth showing. I hadn't seen that in so long it made my chest ache. We sifted through the past together, Not as mother and child, not as strangers, just as two people remembering the same life from different angles. He found a photo of Richard holding him up on his shoulders. He looked tired, Daniel said quietly. He was, I replied, but never too tired for you. Silence then, not awkward. Just full. Then his hand brushed something soft. He reached in and pulled out the booties, the green ones, the ones I hadn't wrapped, hadn't offered, just kept. He held them gently. Are these for them? He asked. I nodded, my throat suddenly thick. He didn't say thank you, didn't say anything, just turned them over in his hands like something fragile and rare. Then he smiled, small, but real. He placed them back in the box, carefully, and I realized then we were building something, not from scratch, but from the pieces neither of us had thrown away. The morning came like all the others, no fanfare, no candles or songs, just light spilling across the kitchen floor and the hum of the fridge trying too hard. I didn't expect anything. I stopped marking birthdays years ago, not out of bitterness, just realism. When people forget you at the wedding, you stop expecting balloons. I made myself tea, pulled the good mug from the shelf, the chipped one with the violets, because old loyalties still matter. I sat at the table, watching the light change, hour by hour. Afternoon came. Then the doorbell rang. It startled me. I opened the door slowly. No one was there. Just a basket, wrapped in cellophane. No bow. Inside, a small jar of raspberry jam. My handwriting on the label, but I hadn't made it. A Polaroid photo, and a card. My hands shook as I pulled the card from the envelope. Happy birthday, Mom. They know your name. Love, Daniel. I pressed the card to my chest, then looked at the photo. Daniel holding two tiny bundles in green knit hats. My hats. His eyes were tired, but alive. The twins' faces barely visible, swaddled tight. But there I was, in their color, in their names, in their roots. I carried the basket inside like it held glass, sat down, and placed the photo on the mantel. Right beside the framed one of him on my hip, both of us younger, laughing like the world couldn't break us. 2 moments, years apart, but finally, side by side. This time, I whispered. This time, I'm in the picture.